All right, so let's get started. So this is the introduction to Git and GitHub. So we'll be talking about Git, what it is, and we will install Git for the first time, configure it, and we're going to do some workflow, and then we are going to work on the assignments and do some advanced, not advanced, upper intermediate or upper intermediate task with Git. All right. So the first task is to get Git. All right. So getting Git is easy. If you are on Windows, you go to gitforwindows.org. All right. I know that some of you may go and get the desktop, um, get the desktop app. This is not a desktop. We're going to be using the command line. The reason why we use the command line is basically the command line is the essence of using Git, right? Desktop applications may change. The workflow in a desktop graphical user interface may change, but using Git and the commands will not change. All right. So let's get Git. I'll be explaining the tasks to those who are on Windows and those who are on Mac OS, right? So getting this on Windows is easy. You need to go to Git for Windows.org. All right, I already went there, and so this is a Windows virtual machine right here, and then click on download. All right, so I already did this. So you need to download Git for Windows, right? And then click on downloads and find the downloaded file, and then just double click on Git for Windows. So Git 2.42 is what I have, the latest. If you have already Git installed, it will be recommended that you configure it. You can keep it, but you need to configure it the way that is configured here in this workshop. So I'm going to be installing this. So I download the installer. So this is the setup. I'm going to go with next. I'm going to put it in C program files, next. And here it says already exists because I already did this, and I uninstall it. So we can see this. So here we don't need the desktop one, so additional icons, no icons for desktop. Just leave the default ones. Let me see if they change something here. Add a git bash profile to Windows terminal. I think we're good if we keep the default selections here. Here the select the start menu folder, Git, I'm gonna keep it the default. Here it will ask you what is the default editor that Git will use. So the default editor, if you are on a Mac, you can keep Vim, or if you're on Linux. But if you are on Windows, I highly recommend that if you are a beginner, especially, that you select Visual Studio Code, especially if you have Visual Studio Code installed. All right. So here I will select Visual Studio Code, and then I'll click on Next. And then here it's asking me the name of the initial branch in your new repositories. The default one is called master. We don't like this name. This name has racist connotations. So I want to select, I like to select main, right? If you already have Git installed and your main branch is called master, that's fine. We can rename it using the command line, right? But I just like whenever I have a fresh Git installation, to name the main branch as main, because this is what GitHub uses as the default name. All right, so selected the second one. So this is the only change that I made so far. And here adjusting your path environment, it says Git from command line and also from third-party software. This is what I want to keep. And then it will use OpenSSH, and then it will use the OpenSSL for connections. And then it asks me how do you want to do the line ending conversions. Keep the default stuff for Windows and default one for basically the terminal emulator. We're going to use the PowerShell, so that's fine. And then here, choose the default behavior or get pull. We're going to talk about it, but I like to keep it the default, fast forward or merge, and then next, and then get credential manager. We're going to use it for authentication with GitHub. So keep that one as the default, and configuring any extra options here, keep it as the default ones. And then before I click install, I want to show you what happens if I open the command line. Here it's PowerShell. If I open PowerShell and I try to check if Git is installed, so I do Git minus minus version, right? And I'm getting an error message here that says the term Git is not recognized. That means it's either Git is not installed on your machine, or it means that Git is installed, but the Windows PowerShell doesn't know where, right? If it doesn't know where, we need to edit something called path environment variable. We're going to talk about it later, to tell it where Git is installed. So I didn't hit install, so that's why I get this error. So I'm going to close PowerShell now, and then go back to this installation, and then I'm going to hit install, right? So we're going to wait for this guy to finish installation. And then once it installed, we're going to go back to the Windows PowerShell terminal command line, and then we're going to type git minus minus version, right? So just a show of hands, how many of you got when you type git minus minus version? I want to see the version. You copy the version and then you put it in the chat, right? So I want to see people running the command git space minus minus version, and then copy and paste the command in the chat, right? Good. I'm getting someone with an error. That's good to see that error. Many people are saying 2.42. All right, so here it says, what do you want to do when it's done? And then I do finish, right? Okay, good. So let me do this so people can see what I'm doing. And I'm not a Windows guy, so I will be slow, admittedly. So here now, after the installation, git minus minus version, and I'm getting 2.42.0 on Windows, right? Everyone is faster than my slow virtual machine. All right, let me look at the post of what people are saying here. If they run into an error. All right, what was the error, Yusuf? So see someone posting an error. Doc at the I don't know what's the doc at the GIT CMD here. All right, so many people with two git minus minus version 2.37. That's an older one. That's good. You don't need to update for what we are doing, right? So if you run into an error, so what you need to do is you basically need to make sure that Git was added to your path. And if you use the latest installer from Git for Windows, you should be good to go. All right. So if you use the Git for Windows installer, you should be good to go, right? If you have installed Git through another means, I recommend that you try to install it and follow exactly as what I did when I went to Git for Windows. Only change that I made was changing master to main, right? The rest were the defaults. So now we have Git installed here on this machine, and then we can move on and talk about what is Git and why do we need it, right? Let's those who are still within the station, they can catch up when I'm talking about what is version control, why do we need to use Git. So every software project has an artifacts. So these artifacts are basically your could be your documentation, your designs, your prototypes, and the most important one is the source code. Source code is the most important asset in your project. So source code files, they need to be kept safe, all right? And we need to keep track of backups, all right? We need to keep up of historical changes, who changes what line was changed, what was the change from version 1.0 to 2.0, for instance. All right. If someone fixed a bug and that bug introduced another bug, how do we see which lines were changed so that way we can jump straight to that issues and fix it? How do we return back? Let's say we were working on a new version of my software and I pushed version 2 and it was great. People are using my software and I added a feature for version 2.1. So I worked on a feature and then I released 2.1. And once I released that, people reporting weird issues that I have no idea that these are going to be caused by the new feature that I added. So how do I return back? How do we revert or return back to the previous lines of code and the status of my project? So Git allows us to keep track of historical changes to the code and see who wrote what, who changed what. So that means we're going to collaborate with people. So when you work in projects, in your all of your courses, or when you work in a company, you're going to be coding with a team, right? So how do we see who contributed what, how much contributed, who introduced a bug, who did what, who fixed, who reviewed? All of these things are logged and kept track using a version control system, right? So allow team members to work faster without stepping on each other's work. If a mistake is made, you can revert and return, fix the error, and do the changes, right? Version control is the practice of tracking and managing changes to software code over time, right? So this is really helpful whenever we protect our source code from errors, bugs that were introduced accidentally. All right. So why do we need it? Well, basically all the reason that I mentioned is we need to save and track the progress in our code in snapshots, right? So snapshot is a way to record a set of changes to your source code. We want to do the undo and revert back to a previous snapshot, right? Snapshot means that point of time that the change was made, right? Each change that you made to your code is time stamped, right? So we want to see the progress that we made. We can work on a separate version of our code through something called the branching. We're going to talk about branching and merging tomorrow. So you can work with a distributed team of developers, track contributions, so see who made what, who changed what. So basically, adopting version control is basically the standard, the de facto standard for agile software development if you want to move faster, right? So Git is basically a version control system. It's not the only one. There are other version control system, but the widely used one is Git. It's distributed, and it was developed in 2005 by Linus Torvalds, which is basically was the creator of Linux. And Git is highly optimized for distributed workflow. Integrity and security checks are core components of Git. It's very basically flexible for complex and linear workflow. That means if you're only working alone, you're adding, making changes. It's very straightforward to work with, as well as for large projects, large contributors, they can also work on, right? And again, Git is basically the de facto standard version control system, and every software engineer is expected to know how to use it, right? You literally can't be in IT if you don't know how to use Git, right? In 2023, you can't be functioning in IT if you have no idea how to use Git. All right, so I talked too much. So the TLDR, right, of these things that I said, think of Git as a tool to keep track of different versions of a document and a powerful collaboration tool. All right. So we did the installation really quick, so I can see people getting Git already installed. The one that I recommend is you go to gitforwindows.org or in Windows. If you are on Mac OS like me, chances are high if you have Xcode command line tools, you're gonna find the Git. So if you are on Mac, what you need to do is you need to install Xcode command line tools, and to install this command line tools, you need to open the terminal app, and then you basically need to go to run this command Xcode dash select and then space minus minus install, right? And so here's in Mac my terminal, and if you run git minus minus version, you should be getting a version of Git, right? Um, to install it on Mac OS, you need to do Xcode select. So you do Xcode select and then minus minus install, uh, right? And then you run this command with enter, right? I'm not gonna run it because it's already installed in this machine. And then you can also go to just Google how to install it on Mac OS, and you'll find resources from Apple, or you can even go to git dash scm. This website will tell you how to install it using Homebrew or Mac port, right? I think I installed Git for some reason before, but now it's telling me invalid active developer path. Are you in Windows or Mac OS, Aziz? Mac. If it says what invalid active developer path, maybe it's not installed in your path. So try to install it again using. Did you install it using Homebrew? So on Mac, if you go to this site, git dash scm, you should be able to see the instruction on how to install it using Homebrew, right? So if you go to download for Mac, there is no binary download for Mac. You should have Homebrew. Probably start using Homebrew or MacPort or Xcode. So these are the three ways to install it on Mac OS. And if you don't have Homebrew, click on this link, Homebrew, and then copy this command in the terminal to install Homebrew. So open the terminal and then copy this whole command, and then run. Just hit enter, and then go back here and run this command, bro install git, and it should fix it for you, right? If it doesn't, let me know, and then I'll be glad to look at it after we're done. So now Windows people are upset that we're talking about Mac. And they're just waiting to get started. So move on. If you are on, yes, this lecture is recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. On Linux, you should be. I think if in your or if you are on Linux, I don't think you need any help. I think you are smart and you'll be able to do it, right? Um, right. What virtual machine are you using on Mac? This is an Intel Mac. It's not an Apple chip, so it's not an M1 or M2. So I'm using, I think I'm using VMware Fusion or VirtualBox or something. Yeah, VMware Fusion right here. Right, this is an Intel. It's an old iMac that I'm working on. All right. The installations are boring. If you are on, you don't need Windows. If you want to use Git, you'll be able to use Mac, right? And it works great. I'm on Mac. I'm only using Windows to show people that how to do things in Windows. All right. But if you want, there are ways to get a virtual machine on Mac, and then we can talk about it later, right? For Sahar. All right. So moving on. So to make sure that you've got Git, you should run git minus minus version, and now you should be good to go. We need some tools, right? So using Git alone is not enough, right? To be a developer, to get some of the examples. So we do need to get some text editor. I highly recommend downloading and using Visual Studio Code. This is not Visual Studio .NET, the IDE. This is VS Code, Visual Studio Code, and it's really great text editor from Microsoft. It's open source, and it's just great, right? So let me close these things, and this is Visual Studio Code is installed on this virtual machine, right? And I also have it on Mac, right? So because we're going to write some source code files, and then we are going to basically pushing that code and uploading it to GitHub, right? So we're gonna be using Visual Studio Code. If you're into Java, you can use IntelliJ IDEA. It's fine, but it's going to be slower for this task. What is GitHub? GitHub is basically a web-based Git repository hosting service for software development, version control, collaboration, and having fun with sharing code, reporting issues, talking to people. So you're going to need a GitHub account to get started. GitHub repositories can be accessed either over HTTPS or SSH. When we try to download things off of GitHub, we're either using the HTTPS or SSH protocol. So if you're using HTTPS, then the URL will look similar to you. So you're gonna get github.com/your username, and then / the project name, or what we call repository or repo. All right, and then .git. So that's if you're using HTTPS. If you are using SSH, so we can also work with all repository over SSH. However, the URL will be different. So the URL will be git at github.com and then : your username, and then forward slash the repo site the project.git, right? This is tricky to get on campus because SSH, as of today, SSH port 20 works on port by default on ports 22, and port 22 is blocked on the university. So if you're on a lab or anything on campus, make sure that you're using HTTPS for authentication, right? Um, so um, um, uh, so I don't think I'm gonna go. So one of the things that we need to know how to use Git is basically having some basic understanding of um, the command line in order to use Git. So in order to use Git, you need to have some really basic understanding of using the command lines. So the basic commands that I expect everyone to know is cd. When you go to a directory, change directory, it's like navigating. So if you are on Windows or Mac, they will work the same. If you are on PowerShell, so I don't want people to on Windows to use the cmd.exe. There's another one called cmd.exe. I don't want people to use that one because that one, the syntax is different. If you use PowerShell, you'll feel very similar to what we have on Mac Linux, right? So CD is used to go to places. So if I say CD and then DOW tab, it will autocomplete. So this is the equivalent of me of navigating to the downloads folder if I want to go to the downloads folder, right? If I want to go back, I do CD colon colon. And then if I want to see the content, I do ls, and it will list all the folders in my current directory, right? So this is equivalent of me going to a folder or going to a directory and basically navigating from folder to folder, right? So right now I am at C users Khalid. So this is the equivalent of me going into C volume and then going to users and then going to Khalid, right? So if I want to go to desktop, if I am sitting here, I can see where I am. So I do pwd, all right? PWD means print the working directory or the present working directory, the current folder, the path that I am in, and I'm under the folder Khalid, right? If I want to see what's inside it, I do ls, and then ls would list all the commands for me. So if I want to go to desktop, since I am here in Khalid, I can go to desktop. So similar way that I went with the mouse, with the graphical user interface, this file explorer, I can go to it using cd desktop. All right. So now I am at my desktop. I hit Control L to clear the screen and go up. So now I want to start working on a project, right? So there's some of these commands are make directory, create a folder, and the like, right? So let's get started with Git for this example. So I'm going to create a folder. So I wrote the command make directory. I am in desktop, all right? And I'm gonna call it Git workshop, right? Example dash example, right? And we created that directory. So now I can go to it. So I say Git workshop example, right? So now you can open this um, in any text editor that you have. So you could go to Visual Studio Code, or what is the other one that people use in Windows? Called Note. Yes, the same syntax that there is for Mac and Windows, right? It's exactly the same syntax. So there is one called in Windows, I think Notepad something, Notepad plus plus maybe. So you can open that in Notepad, Notepad plus plus, what have you, right? Yeah, you can open that folder if you want. So I made that folder. Now I can open that folder here in Visual Studio Code. If you don't have Visual Studio Code, please download it. It's just nice to work with. And I'm gonna open this folder, right? and it's an empty folder. So select this folder, and now it's open. So I need to create a file. So this is just a simple file. So I'm gonna call it example.txt. Just to keep things simple, it's just a text file. This can be a Java file, can be any file, right? And then I'm just gonna write hello Git, right? And then save it, Control S. And then I want to go to this PowerShell, clear my screen, Control L, and then do ls. Now I can see the content that is basically added to here, which is example.txt, right? So now this is a project, and it's how do you open an empty folder? You can just open, go to VS Code, and then you do File, Open Folder, and then you point to the folder, you open it, and then you click on File and New File, right? New text file or new file, or you click here. I just hovered here on the folder, and I clicked on this icon, New File. All right, we can't. How do you open an empty folder? We can't. What do you mean you can't, Faisal? Um, you just can open. I mean, you should be able to open it in your editor, right? Cool. So now I want to create a project on GitHub to start working on Git. But before I want to configure Git, I really want to so this is listing directory, making directories, getting helps in the command lines, and we want to start with Git. So the first time that we're using Git, we run the commands git config, and then we will initialize a repository, and then we add things to it, and then we commit, and then we push. All right. So the first thing that we need is we need to create an account on GitHub. Right, so now we need to configure Git to work with our GitHub account. So we need to configure Git locally. So Git, now the version control is locally, it's not on GitHub, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I need to run these commands to configure Git for the first time, right? So I'm going to run this command in the terminal or PowerShell, or if you're on Mac, you should be able to do the same on if you're on Mac, you should be able to do the same as um, in the terminal app, all right, as what we're doing here in PowerShell. So first thing is we want to tell Git our name, so that way any change that we made is recorded with our names. So what I need to do here is, if I move this guy here, I need to type this command, right? So with me, type this command. So git, and then space config, and minus global. So this will take effect on the computer user account, not on this project or folder. And then we're gonna tell it what we want to set up. So you want to set up user.name, and then space, give it your name, right? Excuse my small virtual machine. And then just give it your name, right? Any name that you want to, any change that you make to files, it will be noted under your name. So hit enter, nothing happens. That means it worked, right? Next is you need to tell it what is your email, right? Now this email will be connected. You may only use email address connected to your GitHub account. So what you should be using is, when you configure user.email, put the email address that you use on GitHub, right? GitHub has a special name. If people want to avoid spam is you put your username at users.noreply.github.com, right? So I'm going to choose that as my email. So I'm going to say git config minus minus global similarly. And let me just let people see the command here, and then space uh, user, sorry, space user dot email this time, and then space, and then pass it as a string. All right. So my username is Gail Harvey, and then I'm gonna do at users dot is it no reply to github.com, right? So users dot no reply dot github.com, and then I'm going to be um, done with this setup. All right. So now we told Git who we are. We told Git our user email address that we wanna do. So now we need to authenticate with Git, right? So go to your GitHub account. You all should have a GitHub account, as I sent out in the flyer, that you all should sign in into GitHub. Um, so go to github.com and then sign in. And so sign in, and it's asking me to do two-factor authentication. Grab my phone and do the two-factor authentication. '89 approve, and it should let me in. Cool. So now I'm in this machine. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to create a new repository. So you can create it under your username, or if you have organization, you can select the organization, give it a name. So GitHub workshop example, right? Make it public, please, because I want to see the links today. So make it public, and do not add anything to it, right? Don't add anything, no readme file, no .git ignore. We're going to talk about this tomorrow. No license, no nothing, right? Just create this repository. All right. So once we create this repository, now we need to link my project to this repository. So how do I link it? So as you see, you can access GitHub using HTTPS or SSH. So these are the ways, right? We're not going to be using desktop, using the command line. And I said for many reasons, including this desktop graphical user interface do change a lot. And the assumption for you as a software engineer is you know basic Git commands, all right? And the interface for the command line is very unlikely that it will change. It has been stable, very stable. So we're going to be using HTTPS, especially if you're on campus, since SSH is blocked. So here it says, or create a new repositories on the command line, or push an existing repository from the command line. All right. I don't know. SSH why is blocked. They don't want people to SSH to machines. So git remote, add origin HTTPS, and then you add the git repository. So because we have an existing repository from a command line, we need to basically add this remote address to it and then push to it, right? So let's do this first. But since we are new, that means we have not created a GitHub repository. So this is a folder that we have right here. So this is a folder, but it's not a Git project. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to run the command git init. Make sure that you are inside the project folder. So in my VS Code, I am basically, I went to this Git workshop example folder. If you don't know where it is, you can just right click on the file here, and then you can copy the path, right? And then you can go to the terminal here, and then you run cd and then space paste, and then remove the file name. So you go to the folder, right? So I'm gonna run the command git init to get started. So this is git init, and this will initialize an empty Git repository. So now this folder has become a special folder. That folder now is being marked as a Git project, right? So a Git repository. So if I do ls, you can see that it has example.txt, but if I do ls minus a, doesn't work on Windows. In Mac, it will show the hidden files, right? So I only ran git init. So now this is already a Git repository. So this folder now is marked as a Git project or a Git repository. So what I need to do now is I need to add my files to my local repository. So now when using Git, you're going to have a local repository. So you're keeping track of changes locally on your computer. And when you push to GitHub or you upload to GitHub, you're going to be having the same one, right? You're mirroring your local Git repository to a remote server on github.com, right? So I'm getting some people saying, getting warning, your console font probably doesn't support Unicode, experience strange characters. I would consider switching to true type font. This could be some font settings on your, is this in PowerShell? Just reset the default ones and you should be fine. So this is, don't worry about it. You're not gonna be using any code things in here. So we run git init. So now the command that I want you all to know is git status, right? So git status, it will tell you the status of your project tracking and how things are tracked in your local repository. So if I run git status, it says you are on branch main. That's because by default, I selected main as the default branch and say no commits yet. So we have not committed anything. We have not recorded any snapshot yet. And here it says untracked files. So you have a file in your folder, in your repository, but it's not being tracked. Git is not tracking the history to this file. So how do I track it? In order for you to track it, you need to do git add. So you need to run git add, and then you specify the name example.txt and then hit tab. And now you have added this file to Git. So if you run git status, again, it says the file has been added. That means we staged the file. So in Git, when we add a file to Git, we say, hey, Git, please keep track of this file. And then Git will say, sure, okay, I will keep track of it. But tell me when you want to store and save a snapshot of this file, right? So we added the file. That means this file will be tracked by Git. but we have not saved a snapshot yet. To save a snapshot, you need to run git commit. So the file now is staged, but it's not committed. So once we added the file, we can start committing. So we say git commit message and then space, give it a message. So each commit or each snapshot has to have a message. So that way, when we want to return back to the history, we can see something meaningful of what has been added, right? So the message is typically people would add init commit or first commit. So that's the message that I will be adding. You can use double quotation after -m or single quotation. So we committed the change. All right. So now successfully committed. So if I run git status, I will be saying that nothing to commit, working tree is clean. That means we saved a snapshot of this file locally here. And now we need to push it to GitHub, right? So how do we push it to GitHub? Now we have this Git repository locally, local to my machine. How do I push it to GitHub? To push it to GitHub, first we need to have some sort of a mirror to what we have locally, right? So if we go back to github.com here, when we created the project, it says you need to add a remote, right? So we added the file. We don't have README file. We have example. First, we run git init, and then we added the file, and we committed the file. Here, if your branch is named master and you want to rename it to main, you can run this command git branch -m main. It will rename it for you. And here we run the command that will add this remote repositories, the address of this remote repository to my project. So here we get this command, git remote add origin. So we're going to add a remote repository, and then we want to give it a name. So origin is just a name. So instead of us saying, hey, push to this long URL, we want to use a short name. And the short name here is called origin, right? So every time we want to push to GitHub, we don't say https github.com/ my username / the project name.git. No, we say origin. So origin, think of it as just a short name for the long URL, right, of your remote repository. What is in GitHub is called remote repository, and what is on your local machine is called the local repository, right? So let me copy this command here, and then go to the terminal, PowerShell, and I'm gonna clear things with Control L. So once we push things, then I can add this remote. So I just right click and then paste this for me. And now I run it. And now this remote is added, right? So next, so once we added the address of our remote repository, we can start pushing. All right, so how do I push? Well, you can run this command, git push -u origin main to push to GitHub. And you need to authenticate with GitHub first. So let me run this git push origin upstream -u and then main. So similar to what is here. So git push -u origin main -u origin main. All right, you don't use upstream. This is just always for the first one. First commit, and now we run and we need to authenticate with GitHub because we didn't tell it what our username is. So if you're on Windows, you're gonna get this nice thing to authenticate with Git. So you can say, hey, sign in with your browser. So this is us authenticating with GitHub. So I'm gonna click on sign in with your browser. This is only for the first time that you use this. So I'm gonna click sign in with your web browser, and now it will ask me to authenticate. I hope this virtual machine is not gonna disappoint me here. Please don't. So you should be sent to this address, and then it will send you back to authenticate with Git. Yeah, virtual machines are weird. That's why I'm getting this blocked for some reason. All right, maybe it worked. It worked actually. So because I already authenticated, right? Almost gave me a heart attack. Just kidding. So if I go to my code now and I try to reload the page, wow, I see the code now, right? So I want to see people putting links in the chat to their repositories, please. So I'm gonna get a show of hands. How many people, how many of you have followed me? So please um, paste the link to your GitHub repository. Cool. I see people posting here. Very cool. All right. So now we made the changes. We pushed it to GitHub. And every time I need to make a change, so if I go to VS Code, all right, and I'm gonna just list what things we did. So things we did, and then I'm gonna say we run git init, right? And then we always run git status to see what is the status of our local repositories. We run the git command git add to add some file. So the file name was example.txt or any name of files that you want to add. And then once we added, that means the file was staged. We ran the command git commit -m, and then we give it some message, right? And then we ran the command git um, git push origin main. If you're starting after git init, you need to tell your local repository where the GitHub repository is. So you run git remote or git add remote, git remote add, and then origin, and then you give it the URL, right? And then you put the URL that ends with .git to GitHub, right? So what did I do on Windows? Oops. So once you do these things, so this is the workflow that we all going to follow tomorrow, and we will add more to it with doing diffs, how to merge, how to collaborate, and how to make cool stuff. So this is the workflow that I want you all to know by today, is how to initialize a GitHub repository, how to add a remote GitHub repository, and how to check the status, and then how to add files, stage files, and then how to commit files and then push to GitHub. So one last thing and I will end. I know we're running out of time almost. So if I save this file and then I go to git the same folder that I'm in and I run git status, now it tells me that your branch is up to date with origin main. So that means origin, remember, is the short name for the GitHub long name on the address of your remote repository. Main is the name of the branch on GitHub. So you're up to date. That means what I have locally is exactly what I have on GitHub. But changes were made here. So if I want to record this change and add it, stage it to be committed, because I can commit multiple files, right? We can git add file 1, file 2, file 3, but commit is only one. So what I can do here is I want to add this change. So I do git add and then example.txt, and then I run the command git commit message, added more content, and then commit this message. And now if I want to push it to GitHub, I do git push, and then I have to specify the address of GitHub. So we say origin. Remember, it's just origin, the name, and then the branch on GitHub. So when I push git push origin main, and then I hit push, and it should go and push to GitHub, right? And we got this change now. If I go to the GitHub repository, and if I reload this guy, and then I click on the example.txt file, and I can see that the last message was add more content. And if I click on it, I will be able to see that Git now recorded that this commit that I made resulted in 7 additions and 0 deletion, right? Um, so so these are the lines in green were added, and then this is what was kept as it is, right? If it was removed, you're gonna see it in red, all right? So keep your work, because tomorrow I'll open a submission for what is going to be tomorrow. And let me just tell you what is going to happen tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to be working on how to create, to make changes to your file caused by 2 developers. So what happens if 2 people changing the same files? How do we see the difference? How to do diff in files, and how to revert back to a change that was accidentally made, and how to create branches, how to allow team members to create a branch for each one, and how to merge a branch, and how to do the diff between the branches. And we're gonna go through a desktop app called Get It. It's under GitHub. I posted the link for it. So that will be what we will be talking about tomorrow, right? Tomorrow is more advanced on diffing, how to do diffs, and how to do um, how to do diffs, and how to merge things, and how to collaborate with people. So we're going to be looking at this Get It app, desktop app. It's like a workshop app that I forked, really, really cool app that allows people to work through the tutorials line by task by task. And then I'll ask you guys to submit a screenshot of your work once you're done with all the tasks here. Right, so there'll be assignment on this, and there will be assignment on merging and how to merge from remotes, right? So thank you all. The video will be posted after tomorrow, so together with part 1 and part 2, and your instructor will give you the link to the video, right? So I'll stop recording now, and we'll see you guys tomorrow. If anyone with a question, they can stay here, and I'll be staying for 5 minutes to answer questions.